problem was my engine stopped 5,000 feet as I was trying to get over these 6,000 foot mountains. Restarted the engine in the air, but it was coughing. I knew I was going to die again. And lined it up on a road, saw there were no cars coming, and just put it in really in the same way a hang glider pilot would.
After parking up for the night, the Jordanian Air Force gave him a change of fuel, 15 gallons of the right stuff, petrol, and orders were given to clear the road again. Brian was off on his travels again, bound for Amman, and as luck would have it, a meeting with King Hussein of Jordan. Brian was to be granted a 10-minute audience.
I was standing there like some hooligan out of the desert, okay, still in my flying clothes, all dirty and scrubbed, standing next to a king with his arm around my shoulders, taking photographs. Very moving that was. I was so touched by the fact that he did that.
On from Amman, the Saudi desert would also throw up more problems with fuel and with sandstorms. Brian spent the night with Bedouins after a forced landing.
It was another case of where the Arabs were wonderfully hospitable. They heard what I was going to do and they just put me up for the night, gave me petrol, cleared the road the following day, the great Trans-Arabian road the following day, and I took off and flew away.
What lay ahead was the Persian Gulf and the approach to Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. Brian's family, at home in Bristol, were following his adventures on television.
King Hussein today, it isn't often that you meet a king, but I went to the
After his royal encounter, they got to hear of his latest escapade by telephone.
Brian rings up on Christmas Day, and I pick up the phone and he says, "Miss Campbell, I'm standing here by the phone," he says, "and I'm dripping wet." I go, "Dripping wet?" He says, yes, and the plane's in the Gulf. But don't worry, we're going to rescue her. So I'm feeling really dumb, and I say, "You came down in shallow water then?" No, it's very deep where I came down." Well, how come the plane's going to be rescued? Well, she's floating, isn't she?
This was another one for the scrap album. Brian had gone into the drink, 35 miles out in the Gulf. The engine had cut out because of a fuel blockage.
They took us out in a helicopter and virtually threw us out and disappeared in the distance while we were left swimming for the aeroplane. But there was a ship nearby, so it wasn't that frightening. We took the wings off, and I chopped a dirty great hole in the wing, which made Brian pull his hair out again, put a lifting strap in, and lifted the plane aboard. It was mainly drying out, washing it, cleaning it, and putting all the bits back together. The bulk of the damage in Abu Dhabi was actually done when we were transporting the plane to the airfield, and a guard closed the gate on the tailplane, which strained everything quite badly. The damage from the water, amazingly, was very little. It was just electrical.
We did have mishaps, yeah, but we were pushing it out. But then there wouldn't be a story if there weren't any mishaps. People accused us of planning the mishaps in London, and I used to laugh at them. And I almost thought it at one point, actually. I was convinced Brian was going to land on a tanker in the Gulf or on an aircraft carrier. I know he was looking for one, but he never found one, thank God.
I'm really pleased to know that she's going to fly again. So she's been a long way. She's been turned upside down. Engine failures, and we're not really halfway there yet. And if she flies again after falling in the sea, I'm sure there isn't anything that's going to stop us getting through.
The falling in the sea cost 5 flying days. By then they were 30 days into the flight, with no way of emulating the Vickers Vimy. But the microlight was reassembled, and Brian set off again on New Year's Eve. And across Pakistan and India, he did begin to match Ross and Keith Smith day for day. There was only one unscheduled landing in India caused by a blocked fuel filter, and that was soon fixed. Mechanically, at least, everything seemed to be going smoothly.
But I suffered in India more than at any other time from psychological problems. I had what I call the panics in India. They were, I became suddenly aware that I was flying a small, fragile aircraft. And you go through in your mind all sorts of things. You rummage through your mind, sitting there hour after hour. I opened up this door and this jinn, this devil, jumped out that hated flying, absolutely hated flying, wanted to be on the ground now, immediately, throw the canopy open, stand up there and just nosedive straight off the aircraft and down. Now, you know, that might sound daft to you, and it certainly sounded daft to me, and the rational part of me was saying, this is silly, you'll die, you'll die. Jin screamed at me and screamed at me to say, you know, get out, get out, get out, get down on the ground. And I lay there, terror-struck.
Brian, overcoming his psychological problems, crossed India in just 4 days. He was then onwards down through Thailand and Malaysia. The next problem, a forced landing in a paddy field near Penang, had a more familiar cause.
The engine suddenly came down to one cylinder, and I was left looking down at all sorts of ground to try and get it in, and put it down quite safely. Discover that there's oil in the front cylinder, which means I think that the piston has gone. So I'm waiting now for Mike Atkinson to come in from Kuala Lumpur. At least I've got to try and contact somebody. But another close shave, got away with it again. Dalgety Flyer will fly once more.
Mike Atkinson duly tracked Brian down and fixed the engine. And the following day, the lone pilot trundled off with his aircraft to extend the length of his makeshift runway. And off they went again. With Australia getting closer, Brian could afford to reflect back on his flight, and he interviewed himself.
How do you feel about how you've got so far? I'm disappointed, obviously, that I wasn't able to get anywhere near Ross and Keith Smith, and I think it's because I was held up so much in Europe. But in fact, racing Ross Smith since Karachi, I've been running neck and neck with him all the way across India and Bangladesh, Burma, down through Thailand and here into Malaysia. So it would have been a fair competition if I had had fair winds. How dangerous has it been? Because microlights fly so slow, I think that people have overemphasized their dangers. I mean, everyone's been saying, I've crashed here or I've crashed there. I haven't crashed at all. I've landed the aircraft, even landed the aircraft in the sea. And while there have been dangers and while I've been frightened, I think other aviators at the same sort of stage that I'm at, people like Amy Johnson and Bert Hinkler and Charles Kingsford Smith, people like that, all the early aviators, they must have gone through fear as well. And I think it's just part of what the whole flight's about, coping with it. You feel good afterwards when you've done it.
The last leg was a hop and a skip down through the Indonesian islands, down to Kupang on the island of Timor. By then, Brian was ready to breathe a sigh of relief. One more hop, and he'd be there.
I hopped across the Timor Sea, which used to be known as the White Knuckle Route. It's a sea full of sharks, and I found I couldn't do it in one jump. And I found this little Troughton Island, about 10 miles off the shore of Australia, 1 kilometre long and half a kilometre wide and 20 feet high. It looked like a lump of mud. And I landed there last night. It was a dry island run by a local oil company. There's no beer at all, and it's always been my habit ever since starting this particular flight that after I get out of Dalgety Flyer, the first thing I want is a beer.
A beer, several in fact, awaited Brian on arrival in Darwin the following day. His flight from London had taken 51 days, compared with the 28 days taken by Ross and Keith Smith. He was met on arrival with a telegram from the Australian Prime Minister.
I applaud the determination and courage you have demonstrated in your flight, reviving as it does the spirit of our early aviation pioneers. Welcome to Australia in our bicentennial year. It's signed Bob Hawke, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. The whole flight was pointless if I wasn't in Australia for its birthday. And then when I got to Australia, then I wanted to get to Sydney because that's where it all began. So I just wanted to go on, and I was virtually stopped at Darwin. Mike Atkinson gave me a beer. I said, no, I'm flying on. He said, no, you're not. So I sat there and drank beer and talked to people for 5 or 6 hours when I got to Darwin.
A dozen or so beers later, Brian and the Dalgety Flyer did get to Sydney. In fact, along with Neil Hardiman and Mike Atkinson, they all got to see a fair amount of Australia. We caught up with the trio again a few months later at Adelaide Airport, where there's a small museum commemorating the first ever flight to Australia by Ross and Keith Smith. Here, the early aviators are remembered in stone, the Smith brothers and their engineers, Wally Shears and Jim Bennett. Naturally enough, Brian was most interested in the pilot, Ross Smith, one of the most decorated of Australian airmen, and in the First World War, personal pilot to Lawrence of Arabia. And inside the building, of course, there's the Vickers Vimy bomber itself.
You look at this and you say this is a monument to a particular type of aviation in a particular time. It was an astonishing, brilliant flight. And the fact is, it was years and years before anyone ever made the distance again in that same time. I don't know that people saw the flight of the Dalgety Flyer as an aviation achievement. Many people saw it as amusing and entertaining, perhaps a stunt. I saw it as a recreation of the sort of thing that Ross and Keith Smith did. But I had some advantages. I had runways, I had radio, and that sort of thing. I'd like to think that one day the Dalgety Flyer will hang somewhere and that there'll be an exhibit about her that will arouse 1/10 of the feeling in some people that looking at Ross Smith's aircraft arouses in me. But maybe I'm a man of the 1980s and I don't think that'll happen.
High up in the sky where all our dreams are born, high up in the sky we'll never be forlorn. There in the blue we'll be all alone, where all the world needs us for a throne. High up in the sky heavenly peace we'll find, clouds passing us by, all of them silver-lined. In our plane of love, dear, heads will fly above, dear, high up in the sky of a dream.